for being so basic with those choices right there. I know The End is the other single off of this, but I do feel you have to hear those singles, because in order to understand the Doors and who the Doors were, you have to understand those songs, because that's what broke the Doors as monumental, gigantic hits that turned them from just a band playing, shots in LA to the band that is the Doors. I'm not going to go into a very long biography, because we spent a lot of time talking about the beginning of the Doors in the Waiting for the Sun episode of Combing the Stacks, because that album was released a grand total of about 5.5 months after this album. So the narrative for that album is very similar to the narrative leading up to this album. I will recap just a tiny bit in terms of where the Doors were at, so that we have a little bit of grounding. But the first 3 albums the Doors released, and we covered albums 2 and 3, were all within a year and a half of each other. So they're plowing out albums quickly. And I apologize. I said Waiting for the Sun. It's actually Strange Days, which was the album that was released 4.5 months after
Episode 21.
Episode 21, correct. And then Waiting for the Sun came later, about 5.5 months after Strange Days. So you got 3 Doors albums in under a year, pretty much. So they were all over. That should show you how quickly they blew up too. But just as a recap, once again in Doors history, the Doors were put together in the mid 1960s with Ray Manzarek, and at the time his 2 brothers, and then Ray Manzarek was acquaintances with Jim Morrison. And they got to know each other, and they started making music together. The Manzarek boys eventually leave the group and leave it to Jim Morrison, the one Manzarek who was left over, Ray Manzarek, and the other members of the band, most notably Robbie Krieger, who creates a lot of the guitar sound. The Doors were playing in LA regularly at a club that is pretty much always defined as sleazy or rundown or, grimy, whenever you describe it, called the London Fog. And that was where Jim Morrison morphed from like a shy guy who didn't really like to be a front man to like the Jim Morrison that became the Lizard King, which it's kind of funny to think that like Jim Morrison didn't like playing live in like February of 1966, and then they released this album of August 1966, and he's the fully formed Lizard King, right? So
he's like made a complete transformation.
Quick study, but there's a long history though of like famous musicians who say they're very shy in their personal life, but on stage they become a different animal, and clearly he was one of them. Jimi Hendrix, is another one that was talked about there. So the Doors eventually get a following, and then they go to the Whiskey A Go-Go, where I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago, but they were supporting act 4.
Oh, gosh, the band that I talked about.
Them.
Yes, them, which was fronted by Van Morrison. So Morrison and Morrison. Ugh. So, I know we were not big fans of Astral Weeks, but Van Morrison is notable enough that we should bring that up. Good. Yep. And so, and shortly after that, on August 10th, 1966, this album is released. And so they recorded over the course of a week from August 24th to August 31st. I'm sorry, I said August 10th. August 10th was when they were spotted and signed the record deal on August 18th. And then they recorded this album from August 24th to August 31st.
Wow.
And this is basically their set that they played. Hence why they could turn it around so quickly.
Gotcha.
So what you're listening to on the first Doors album is basically the majority of the set they played at the London Fog and the Whiskey A Go-Go. There were some other songs that were in there that ended up on Strange Days, but this was it's basically all the songs on Strange Days that we liked were the songs that were also part of the set. Yeah. So they just kind of jammed all of their big hits into this one, and it broke very, very quickly. They went on TV all over the place, and once people kind of saw the Doors, they loved them. They clearly, in terms of reading anything, no matter how you process them now, they clearly were a band that caught lightning in a bottle in terms of not just their sound, but also of being of the time of the 1966-1967 period. They went on Shebang, an LA TV show. They went to the Clay Cole show. They eventually were on Ed Sullivan, not quite this early, but that famous thing we talked about where Ed Sullivan said that he he was never going to have him back. When they changed Girl You Couldn't Get Much Higher, they didn't change it and sang it, and then Jim Morrison, uttered, we just did the Sullivan Show. They said you can never come back, which always makes me laugh. So yeah, that's, and then, from there, they're releasing albums and they're becoming the Doors, and they break big. And this was immediately a big hit. Light My Fire was a #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. So it wasn't like a lot of the bands that we covered that it's like they never reached #1 or they couldn't dislodge the Beatles. This band did both. They dislodged the Beatles from the singles chart, and they dislodged the Beatles from the album chart. So immediate hit. And so I guess what we're talking about with this, I'm going to throw to you guys for a reaction, is what are your thoughts on the genesis of the Doors? Josh, what do you think?
I mean, this is what other band have we talked about that defines the 60s the way this band does? We said that this is the most 60s sounding band that there is, and I can totally understand why. Maybe
Jefferson Airplane is the only other band I can think
Jimmy,
of that's 60s, yeah.
But this sound is so like embedded in my head as the 60s. And Morrison is his best on this album, I think. He brings so much good energy, and he brings that sexuality and the animalistic like growl and energy to this album that is a little bit more subdued in the other two albums that we talked about, or he dials it back a bit, I think. This is him at his peak. I can totally understand why people responded to him and the band. I think this is my favorite Doors album, but that's not saying much because I just can't get past the organ. It's like in every song, and it doesn't work for me, and I don't think it carries over to today. I don't think you hear you don't hear the organ much anymore in albums. But I do think that of the songs on here, the big hits still hold up really well. I really like 20th Century Fox. I think that's a great song. Backdoor Man is hilarious and bluesy, and it's great when he sings about it. And
for you or for him?
Yeah, for both. We're talking about guys cheating on their wives, he's the other man, I should say. So
yes, going out the back door.
Yeah,
literally and figuratively.
That back door. Okay.
Yeah, I had to spell it out for you, Matt.
I appreciate that, Josh.
But then you have songs like Whiskey Bar, which on the one hand is pretty catchy to start, but then they incorporate all like the carnival sounding stuff, and it kind of like derails it for me. And then some songs I just don't really respond to or remember, like Crystal Ship and some of the later songs. And then the end just sounds like a Vietnam song to me. I think it's been used so many times
he was never able to articulate what it was even about. He thought it was about the end of a relationship, then the end of childhood, and then he kind of comfortably resided into, a poet puts out words, and those words can be interpreted wherever they want, and it became the ultimate Doors song, in that sense.
Yeah. For
the Morrison aesthetic.
So I think if you're going to start with the Doors and you haven't heard the Doors, start with this album, start with the first one, and you'll see what it's all about, and you'll know right away if you like it or not.
All right, Matt.
So I agree with some of the stuff that Josh is saying and disagree with other stuff. So
good.
I agree that this is easily the best Doors record that we've covered so far. And it's much stronger. I agree with Josh on Morrison's voice. You got a lot of that. You don't have as much of the drony Jim Morrison on this record. You got more of the he's going to belt out, shout, scream in some cases, and that's the Morrison. that's the Morrison I like, of just kind of bringing it in. So
you like the ha Morrison as opposed to the ha Morrison.
Either way, John, I don't think you should do that anymore. But yeah, I like the Morrison that's just going for it, right? And I think that there's plenty. This was the album too that, because again, going back to other episodes, the Doors I didn't really have any of their albums. I had the double disc greatest hits, and I listened to that a lot. So there's a lot of songs on this, obviously, that were on that. Their biggest songs that I've always liked Break On Through. I've always liked Light My Fire. It's long, but I don't, and this is where I disagree with Josh. I love the organ on this. My favorite part of the Doors is, and I've mentioned this before, is Ray Manzarek. I think that's what makes the Doors, I don't want to say as much as Jim Morrison, because I think it makes the Doors in a different way. I think Morrison's kind of obviously the mystique and the voice and the persona, but the sound is Ray Manzarek if you're listening to the music. And I like all the organ, and I think that I can see why somebody might think that it's overblown. I could see why Josh, you might not be as into it, but I really do like that. I love, like you said, the Crystal Ship. I think that's a great example of how else you can bring the keys in, because there's a great piano solo kind of part in that's kind of a more subdued, so it's not always the organ. Sometimes it's a little bit more stripped down as well. Yeah, and Alabama song, man, I freaking love that song. I love it. I don't mind the carnival sounds, man. I think Josh is off his rocker. That song's awesome. It's got this. It's totally out there. It makes sense that you don't like it though. Like not that you don't like that part of it, but that stands out as a unique song, not just on this record, but for the Doors in general. I think it's like one of these songs. The first time you hear it, you like automatically your ears perk up and you're like, whoa, what is this, right?
I agree. It gets in your head too.
Yeah, and it's just like this dancing kind of like I feel like I don't know if I'm like on a pirate ship or whatever, and like in a shanty, and you start this sailor song, kind of thing, but it's not, then it turns into this weird carnival thing, and then it brings it back, and it's almost like the carnival thing is a nice juxtaposition, because when they bring it back, you're like, you like it even more, so I've always liked that song, and it looks like it wasn't even written by them. I just did a quick dive into this. It was written by two German dudes who were died in the late 50s. So I don't know the story behind that song, but that I don't know, and I don't know if you researched that at all, John, but I found that interesting. There's a couple of songs. The second side of the album, from Backdoor Man through the end, I only knew the end, so there's 4 songs on here that I didn't know, but I still like them overall. I think maybe End of the Night might have been my least favorite. That was a little bit of more of a droney sounding song, but I still didn't mind it. The End is a ridiculous song, I will admit that, but I also love that song too. It's I don't mind it at all. I think it's 11 and a half minutes, and it doesn't seem that long for some reason. It's not like Dylan's like Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, where you're like, really, is this still going? For some reason, I don't find that seems that long. And
I disagree with that, but
yeah,
okay.
It's just to me, I'm like, man, that's 11 and a half minutes doesn't seem to, and maybe I'm just so used to it, but that song, I agree with you, Josh, that does remind me, it's Apocalypse Now. I can't help but not see, trees getting napalmed without, or Martin Sheen punching a mirror, at the end of the song, is that's, what that was all about. But Soul Kitchen, I always knew that song, but I never knew it was called Soul Kitchen. So when it came on, I was like, oh, that was a nice treat, But yeah, I'm still not a huge Doors fan, but this, they in a lot of ways, they are the 60s. This is by far the best album that we've covered. We'll see. I think we do do we do 1 or 2 more? 70. We do LA Woman, I know. With 1 more, so we do LA Woman in the 70s.
Yeah, because Morrison Hotel is not in the top 100, I don't believe.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So we'll do 1 more. So we'll see how that falls in. But overall, I like this. I didn't really, unlike the other albums where I was able to pinpoint several songs, I was like, ugh, or eh. I didn't really have that. Maybe End of the Night might have been the only song that kind of came across that way. But I thought this was pretty strong.
Nice.
Yeah, I have a couple things I disagree with. I'll start by saying I don't think this is necessarily the best Doors album we covered. Okay. But I think I liked Strange Days maybe more than you guys did, and Waiting for the Sun as well. I thought that this is just like the other Doors albums, that there's some really good tracks on this, and they're more so than any band I think we've covered in the 60s outside of maybe the Jimi Hendrix Experience. The songs that are well known and the deep cuts, and the difference between the good songs being the songs that are well known and the deep cuts, is more pronounced with the Doors than almost any other band that we cover, I think. Like, if you know a song from the Doors, it's probably because it's one of their great songs. However, I say that with a caveat. Matt, I agree with you completely the end doesn't feel like it's 11 minutes and 51 seconds. It feels like it's 31 minutes and 51 seconds.
And I knew you were going
there.
So
you've known me too long to know that I set the table. Oh my God, that song is like everything that's like gratuitous and grotesque about the Doors all together. I mean, you can cut. I still am going to hold with some of my basic assertions, so I apologize for those that have been listening if they hear it go. The Doors are, when they are good, they're like the girl at the curl. They're real good. Break On Through the Other Side and Light My Fire, like everybody knows them, and the reason everybody knows them is because they're awesome. They are. They're still incredible stuff. Break On Through the Other Side. If somebody said, explain the Doors to me, you could play it. And even if you don't love the Doors, it's not going to be hard to figure out like what was appealing about the Doors. It's everything all together in one thing. It's the organ. It's Robbie Krieger's guitar. It's Jim Morrison's voice. It's everything. It's the big chorus, the build up. You know, a lot of the Doors songs are slow, building up to a crescendo, and then like, you know, firing back down, and then an interlude for the longer songs, and then coming back up. And almost that like feral pickup that Jim Morrison does. The lyrics on this album are ridiculous, and I don't mean ridiculous good. They're ridiculous absurd. But that's part of the appeal of the Doors, is that you've got Jim Morrison's poetry, lyricism, whatever you want to, spoken word, whatever you want to call it. But yes, the songs are fun. Like, there's moments like Backdoor Man is funny as a series of puns. Alabama song Whiskey Bar, I know you mentioned it. Yes, it's a German poem, Matt, and then it was adapted by or Josh, and then it was adapted by musicians in the 50s, and then I think that's how Morrison got to it. He was familiar with the poem and decided he wanted to record it. But yeah, I forget who mentioned 20th Century Fox, but I really liked that song quite a bit. I Looked at You, I liked. So yeah, there were a lot of songs on here that I liked, but the banner songs are Break On Through the Other Side and Light My Fire. They give you an idea of who the Doors are. The end also does, probably in a less flattering. It's like it's funny because Break On Through starts the album and is like the best of the Doors, and the end ends the album and it's like the worst of the Doors. And so you get both elements in the same album, which I kind of appreciate because you get all aspects of the Doors on this. I will maintain until we stop talking about albums that the Doors are actually a very good blues band, and when the farther they veer away from the Doors or from doing blues, I think the less strong of a band they become, but the closer they adhere to the blues, I think they become a very strong band. And that's where I think 70s Doors is going to be really interesting for you guys, because that's where they lean into the blues a lot more.
Okay, good.
Even with songs with blues in the title. Roadhouse Blues comes to mind.
I love that one. That's on LA Woman?
Yes. So
nice.
Yeah. So
go ahead. No, I was just going to say that the other thing I noticed because like I said, I had the greatest hits album. The Break On Through version that I knew was not what I heard on this album. So when he goes, when he sings "She Gets High," he's like "She gets high," and they're doo-doo. They don't say high on my version. They don't say the high part. He just goes "She gets, she gets," and so on this version, I'm listening to it. I'm like, whoa. I did not know that I didn't know that part existed. I never heard that before, so it was a nice little surprise.
Really?
Because it sounds great. Because he holds on to the note a little bit longer, and it's like that's the Morrison voice that I like. So, I just noticed. I'm like, they edited that out on my greatest hits record, which.
Weird.
Because it's not like on Light My Fire.
Producer Ed Sullivan.
Yeah, it's not like on the version of Light My Fire they cut out. We couldn't get much higher. So I thought that was interesting. But so that was a nice little surprise for me.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I'll end with this is a must listen if you want to go through the '60s and understand the '60s. You can argue about whether you like the Doors or don't like the Doors, and I think it seems like we have the same take that we've had before. There's parts of the Doors we appreciate and like, and there's parts of the Doors that we don't appreciate and like, but you just can't tell the story of the 60s without the Doors. And once again, like if I've learned anything from our journey through the 60s, it's an important thing for me is the context of when these albums are released. And to think of this album as being released in 1966, you cannot tell a story of the mid-60s without hearing the Doors. They, in their own way, influenced so many elements of the 60s, the culture, the aesthetic, the sound, the persona. They're the walking embodiment of the 60s, and they don't last much longer than the 60s. They creep into the 70s a little bit, but even at the beginning of the 70s, they feel like they're running on borrowed time, right? And there's very few acts that are so couched in a decade to me like the Doors are in the 60s. That's
they
the
burn
takeaway.
bright, right? Like a supernova.
Mm-hmm.
So you would say that this is appropriately placed at 10 in the decade?
Yeah, it's hard for me not to say that because it's certainly as influential an album as there is in the 60s. Maybe not having the legs, but there's a reason people still are curious about the Doors to this day. And you can't have that influence if you don't have the songs. And I mean, you can argue with me about not like, but I just don't know how you can't like Break On Through the Other Side, and to some degree I know Light My Fire is long, but that is a song that does not feel 7 minutes and 10 seconds to me. It's a song that really plows through as a long song in a very comfortable way. It's basically juxtaposed with the end. It's like two sides of a different coin.
Yeah, I know. I've talked to my brother before about that, and he hates the Doors and thinks they're highly overrated. And I remember him saying with "Light My Fire" that what annoys him about that song is the chorus, because it's like because he's it's kind of building. You know that it would be, and then he gets to the chorus and it's "Come on, baby, light my fire." He's just like it just doesn't. He lays a turd.
Yeah,
but
that's who they are.
Right.
It's like
right.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's a criticism I've heard of that song. But I still like it. And I like the jam outs. I mean, I'm more of a jam band kind of. I can let stuff play out.
Doesn't he set up that though to go like come on baby light my fire, come on baby, and then he goes up to fire. You know what I mean? That's like you can't have that other part without that other part going low, right? So. To me, that's done intentionally to make that part where Jim Morrison basically like goes off the rails more chaotic, right? And then and then it's the interlude, right? That's almost like coming down. Yeah.
No, I've never had a problem with it, but yeah, I can't say that this is it's a unique band. I can't say that this is not properly placed. Because there's ridiculous elements to it, but there's stuff I've never hated the Doors. I've liked a lot of their stuff, and a lot of it's on here. I just find that this one's a little bit more consistent, I think. Than I was rolling my eyes way less on this record than I was on the other two. I think
I would agree with that. Although I think the strongest songs on those other two albums we covered can hang with this album. Yeah,
sure, yeah.